Let's talk about Pecco Bagnaia, the two-time MotoGP World Champion in 2022 and 2023. 2024, he won 11 Grand Prix, and he didn't win the world title. And that was down to crashing out, essentially, of races where he could have settled and he made mistakes. And those DNFs, in the end, cost him the world title against Jorge Martin, who was ultra consistent. Despite only taking 3 Grand Prix wins, he was the man who took the world title. And 2025 was seen to be the year that Bagnaia could bounce back and have the biggest challenge of his career up against his teammate Marc Marquez. Now, we're at the halfway point of the season. Pecco Bagnaia has won one Grand Prix, and that was back at round 3 at Coda. And he has struggled massively this year with the feeling of the Ducati compared to last year. Now, there's a few factors go into this. He is 168 points behind his teammate, Marc Marquez. And there is, how can I say, a level of expectation for Pecco going into this season that he could be the one to challenge Marc. And I always felt like if he could challenge Marc on a week-to-week basis, it would really validate his stance as one of the greats of the modern era of MotoGP. I still think he's a fantastic rider, and of course he's Ducati's most successful rider with 31 Grand Prix wins, I think it is, with Ducati since 2019. And I think that he deserves a lot of respect. He's done great things, and I don't like when I see people criticize him for saying that he is just being successful because of the bike. Of course, the bike has been fantastic, but he's been the rider that's been the standout on the Ducati since he moved into the factory team in 2021. But this year, we've seen Pecco just not be himself. And I want to discuss that further. I did a video a few months ago, and it was around round 4, round 5, saying that I felt like the struggles that he had were bigger than they actually were made out. And a few of the comments were saying that I was overreacting, saying that he would get it right. But we're at the halfway point of the season, and Pecco's in third in the championship. He's even behind Alex Marquez on the GP24. And at the tracks that were expected to be the tracks that he could win at, he just simply hasn't had enough to challenge his teammate Marc and even Alex at some points of that race weekend and throughout the course of the season. I think there's a real concern that he's written off this season already. And it was quite telling that after the Czech Grand Prix at Brno, he put out a statement on Instagram that was very, how can I put it? It was very personal, very direct in his thoughts. And if you didn't see the statement that he put out, it was on a story, and he talked about the first half of the season in detail. And he said this at the very end: surely the approach to the season has changed after these many races, as it's hard to think about fighting with Marc in these conditions. We must be realists. We need to reset and do the best we can, keeping Alex Marquez as our reference point. That, to me, two things. He knows he can't fight with Marc, as Marc is just better this year and better overall. There's no hiding around that. Marc Marquez is Marc Marquez. And this is the first point I want to make. This is no disrespect to Pecco Bagnaia, but Marc Marquez is the greatest talent MotoGP has ever seen. His skill set is incredible, and for people to think and to assume that Pecco would just be able to take it to Marc, like, week in, week out, I think that's not possible. When you look across your box and you're having trouble thinking about trying to fix the riding style and how your feeling is with the bike, and the guy across from you is winning everything and he's making the difference on a machine, that must play into the fact that Pecco thinks, how can I do this? How can I up my game and be at the level that I need to be when I don't have the feeling? And this is the second point. The GP25, yes, it was developed by Michele Pirro, Pecco Bagnaia. From last year, from the Misano test onwards, they had this 2025 thought in the back of their minds, and then Marc comes along at Barcelona, tries out the new machinery, and then throughout all of pre-season, Pecco had said that Marc and him shared the same comments and feedback. And I believe I'm right in saying this quote from Pecco says it's the first time in his career that a teammate has the exact same feeling as him. He said that in pre-season testing. So they made the decision to use a hybrid bike, whatever you want to call it, GP24/GP25 crossover. But immediately from the first round, it's clear to see that Marc was feeling much more comfortable on the bike compared to Pecco. And then you added in the factor of Alex Marquez being there on the 24. And Pecco constantly says then for the next few rounds, even until he can see that Alex Marquez, from the data, is doing things that he did on the 24 last year. And Pecco can't do it on the 25/whatever bike you want to call it. That to me, straight away was the wrong approach from Pecco. It doesn't help the fact that he's the only guy who went from the 24 to the 25. When you look at Marc, he was on the 23 straight to a 25. Dejan Antonio went from a 23 to a 25. Alex Marquez went from a 23 to a 24. Bagnaia needed some sort of validation from, say, Enea Bastianini or Jorge Martin to be like, okay, this is where we all are. But that's not the hand he was dealt. And frankly, it's kind of not a lame excuse, but it's okay. You still have the same data from the guys who are riding the same bike as you. And I think that, yeah, it's worrying that Pecco hasn't fixed this front end feeling that he keeps talking about and how much of a struggle it is. There was kind of a breakthrough with the bigger brake discs at Aragon, but since then he hasn't been able to use those bigger brake discs. Probably see it at Austria, potentially, I think. But I still don't think that's the fix. I said that after Aragon. I don't think it is the true magic bullet for him to fix these issues. I think a successful season for Pecco at this point would be to finish second in the World Championship and just to win a race or two, because when you look at the stats, it's his lowest win rate since 21. In 22, he did all his winning in the second half of the season, and really that's where the title charge came from, catching those deficit up to Fabio Quartararo, those 91 points that he clawed back. But then 23, it was strange. He was really consistent, and then he had that big crash at Barcelona, and then it really set him back. A lot of DNFs came in there after that, mistakes and stuff in sprints and Grand Prix. But then, where do you think of 24? Mentally, it must have played such a real knock-on effect to him, losing that world title to Jorge Martin. And it was down to his own doing, the mistakes that he made, and the positions that he got caught up in with incidents. Martin didn't get caught up in those incidents, and that's where I think Bagnaia has taken a real hit last year. I don't think people really realise deep down how much that'll actually gnaw at him and annoy him. He even talked about it in a documentary series that he's done on his own YouTube channel. First episode, he talked about that he'd never really get over 24, the fact that he lost that title. And this year, it's different. It's not like he's even been in a title fight. His teammate has he's blew him out the water. And Pecco must feel that Ducati and that being his team, because he did all the winning for them, it must be a real hit to his confidence. And I actually really hope that he can reset somehow and try to forget about the past almost. I know it's so difficult, and for me saying that's quite not an excuse for me, but like, I don't know what he's felt losing a world title. I've never lost a world title. It must be hard. It's got to be hard on someone. And then the fact you have the greatest talent in modern day MotoGP come in to your team and instantly just win, I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. And the big thing for me is looking in the future, what does this lead for Pecco and Ducati's future together? Is there going to be something that's going to stop that relationship growing, or is Pecco going to step up and really take charge? I hope it's the latter. I hope he stay in Ducati because he's a fantastic rider. I don't like people discrediting his talent. He's a brilliant talent. He's a really sensitive rider to changes, and I completely get when the bike's not where it wants to be, how that can affect someone. But still, he's a two-time world champion. The GP23 was a difficult bike to ride. They know that. You think of the crisis him and Martin had on it. They struggled with the feelings there. But then in 24, he still made mistakes on the best bike. This is the thing. Pressurized mistakes. And we've just seen this year, whenever Pecco has an off weekend, he can't have an off weekend because Marc simply punishes him. And there's a big gap to thinking about next year. Will it change? Unless Pecco is prepared to consistently do what Martin did last year and hope that Marc makes a mistake if they fight for a title, I can't see it changing. So yeah, it's a really difficult one. I think Pecco still deserves some credit. I think some of his performances this year, considering the struggles that he's had, have been very good. And some of the comeback rides have been really, really impressive. And I hope to see him back at the front the second half of the year. But it's a long way back there. And considering the strong form that Marc is in, it's a big mountain to climb. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe if you're brand new. And we'll see you next week for another video.